welcome to this U.S. presidential election special show coming to you from the Voice of America studios in Washington, D.C. I'm Rajdeep Sardesai. The U.S. elections that have captured global imagination are entering the final stretch. The debates are done. All eyes are now on voting day. Who will be the 45th president of the United States? Will it be the Democratic nominee, Senator Hillary Clinton, or will it be the Republican challenger, Donald Trump? And what will the final verdict mean for India? Joining me on the show, a blue ribbon panel of political experts. First, let me introduce Jim Malone, Voice of America's senior political correspondent, has been covering U.S. politics since 1984. In our studios, Jennifer Nicol-Victor, Associate Professor of Political Science at George Mason University in Virginia. Ed Luce, the lead writer of the Financial Times in Washington, who was also the FT's bureau chief in India for several years. Professor Stephen Cohen, the doyen of strategic studies and South Asian studies at the Brookings Institution here in Washington, D.C., and Professor Irfan Nuruddin, distinguished professor of political science at Georgetown University, the driving force behind the university's India Initiative. Welcome all to the show, and thank you very much for joining us here on India Today TV. Let me go straight first to you, Jim Malone. You're in front of the Capitol Hill. Am I to understand that Hillary Clinton is almost certain to become the next president of the United States, given that most polls now are showing her stretching away with a lead?
Well, I'd be hesitant to call the election early. It's been a very unpredictable year in American politics, given the rise of Donald Trump. But certainly the polls are looking pretty good for Clinton, not only nationally, but in a number of the key, what we call battleground states in the state-by-state electoral process. So yes, Clinton's looking good. The other thing to look at right now, how are Republicans behaving? Some of them are putting distance between themselves and Donald Trump. And I think there are real concerns now among Republicans that Trump is going down in the polls, and they're worried he could drag down the Republican majorities in both the Senate and House of Representatives with him. So right now, after the debates, it's not looking that encouraging for Republicans based on what they're saying. But again, they probably want Trump to fight to the very end to keep the margin close if, in fact, Clinton is the winner.
Okay, so that looks like you're not really quite hedging your bets, but you don't want to predict given what's happened to opinion polls.
Predict. No, I wouldn't go there this year.
Okay, well, Professor Nuruddin, the big question, some would say, is that it's no longer will Donald Trump win, but how did Donald Trump get this far? What is this showing about the U.S. presidential system?
Well, it tells us that party politics are still dominant in American politics. There's a number of people who identify as Republicans. For them, the Republican nominee deserves their support and will be the person they support. Now, how did he get here? How did he get through a pool of Republican potential nominees in the primaries? Well, I think he did it by really taking them by surprise, by tapping into a deep-seated anger about the slow economic growth, about the effects of globalization, and indeed about racist attitudes in American politics that have always existed, but that he has given voice to. The other Republican nominees simply never recovered their poise. They never were able to gain any traction, and before they knew it, he was so far in the lead that they couldn't catch up.
Let me come back to Clinton versus Trump. Ed Luce, done deal? Hillary Clinton, the next president of the United States, or can the U.S. election pull off a Brexit-like shocker? Are we going to see something that happened in your original hometown of London?
Well, look, if this were any other year, I would say now that I'm pretty much 100% certain Hillary Clinton's going to be the next president. But this is a year that has confounded people who think they know what they're talking about too many times for me to risk joining that so close to the election. Brexit, underestimated blue-collar, white, non-London voter turnout, heavily underestimated them, and it overestimated the younger, more multicultural, millennial turnout, and people were left with very red faces. It's possible, it's conceivable that we're going to see an equivalent mistake in terms of polling with the US presidential election, but the number of things that have to happen for Trump to win are really highly improbable. Remember, the Brexit polls were actually pretty close for Remain, whereas Hillary's now had a lead of 6 to 8 points for several weeks, and for that to be overturned, I think will probably be the biggest upset in the history of polling. I mean, there would be other reasons to be upset by a Donald Trump victory, of course.
Jennifer Victor, am I to understand that the sex tapes, the various scandals that have come out in recent weeks, was the charge of misogyny against Donald Trump? Was that the turning point? Are we seeing, in a sense, the emergence of women voters in particular as a strong, in a sense, vote against Trump? There is anger now building against Trump, just as Trump was trying to tap into anger of other working class communities.
There's no question that's part of the narrative of what's going on right now. You know, in American politics, sometimes we talk about an October surprise, some big event that happens in October that really shifts the election that always happens at the beginning of November. And this year, it seems like we have an October surprise weekly or even more frequent than that. The sex tapes was a version of that type of October surprise. It is having an effect, mostly because I think there are a number of Republicans out there who I sort of think of as mainstream conservatives who have identified with the Republican Party for a long time that have a really hard time reconciling their conservative views with what they see from Donald Trump, who is by all means an unconventional candidate who's never been elected to office before. And I think for those voters, the sex tapes have made a big difference.
Can I ask you, at a personal level, did the kind of conversation that you heard repel you as an American woman? Did you feel somewhere that Donald Trump was simply someone who was unacceptable as a U.S. presidential candidate?
You know,
or was it locker room talk, as he tried to dismiss it off as?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I will say that, you know, I'm no prude, and I'm happy to engage in lively conversations of all type. But that talk, I really did rub me the wrong way. It wasn't just being offensive or being vulgar. It was actually talking about assaulting women and doing physical things to them against their will in a way that I think really touches a lot of people.
You know, interestingly, Professor Cohen, and you've sort of seen South Asia over the years and relations particularly between America and India. One of the questions, though, that is emerging is the fact that there is this radical Islamic terror which Donald Trump has tried to bring into this campaign, suggesting almost creating an atmosphere of almost fear-mongering, that there is radical Islamic terror that we should be worried about. Now, in India, that's played out in a different way. Do you believe that plays out on American minds, American fears, particularly in a post-9/11 America?
It hasn't played out the way he thought it would play out. I think it hasn't caught hold deeply. It's important, but not the critical issue. And I think it will be relevant in the future, but not to the point that he stresses.
Do you believe that Americans are concerned about it?
I don't think they're concerned about it the way he thinks they are.
There isn't that sort of fear, that anxiety?
Tied up with the loss of jobs, among other things, and there it combines into a powerful factor.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that entire issue of terror and the way Trump has played it, but just to get a word from you, Jim, you know, there is also a sense that this election is about who do you dislike more? Do you dislike Hillary Clinton more, or do you dislike Donald Trump more? Is there a sense that Hillary Clinton is still intensely disliked? The Washington establishment, represented by Capitol Hill behind you, is disliked by a number of American voters, which is why Hillary Clinton still hasn't completely pulled away with this election.
Yeah, they're both flawed candidates. Hillary Clinton has issues of trustworthiness, but I think we should point something out. Before the first debate on September 26th, this was a close race, 1 to 2 point lead for Clinton. Since that time, Clinton has pulled away, and after each debate, her margin has grown. I think that's quite startling. It shows the power of the general election debates. And one more note on the debates. In the primaries, Donald Trump used those debates as kind of a reality TV star to really hurtle to the front of the pack. The aggressiveness, the insults aimed at his rivals really seemed to work with him in that small group that decides in the Republican primaries. The tactics did not work in the general election debates, and in a way, I think the salacious videotape combined with his debate performances may have doomed his chances.
Let me then come back to what is really of interest in a way to Indian viewers also. Irfan Nuruddin, we heard Michelle Obama say the other day, quite remarkably, that Trump goes against the idea of America. It was a passionate speech that she made. As someone who yourself grew up in Mumbai, now lives in the United States, do you believe that Trump is against the idea of America as a plural democratic society, or are there multiple Americas out there? The point that I raised with Professor Cohen, this bugbear of Islamic terrorism, the fact that walls will be created, people will be deported, immigration being made a big issue. Do you believe that this goes against the idea of America?
There are many ideas of America. It definitely goes against the one that I and most of the people I know would embrace, an idea of America as a nation of immigrants that is open to people from all over the world, that in fact sees in its strength that diversity that comes from being a home to people from all over the world who come to America to make a better life. But the fact is that Trump is where he is because there is also another idea of America, one rooted in the dominance of a white, Christian, English-speaking native population that sees that America under threat from immigrants, from people who don't speak their language, don't espouse values that they believe are inherent to a Judeo-Christian Protestant ethic, and who aren't Catholic, who aren't Christian any longer. And so I don't think it's easy enough to dismiss this as being some sort of aberration. The fact is that in large parts of America, the sense of nationhood is under challenge. We're seeing it in Europe. I would argue that this is partly the Brexit vote as well, that for a lot of British voters, Brexit was as much about their sense of what it meant to be British as anything else. And I think Trump tapped that. And yet, of course, there is a long, proud tradition in America of being open, and I think that is under challenge from Mr. Trump.
In that sense, Ed Luce, how much has this election in a way been influenced by the state of the US economy and the global economy, especially the key issue of jobs? And will Hillary Clinton be good for the global economy, be good for the American economy? Is this election back to that old American saying, it's the economy, stupid? We can talk of Trump's sound bites on Islamic terror, for example, on immigration, but at the end of the day, is this back to economy and jobs?
I think economy and jobs are a huge part of it. I mean, what you've got to remember is that blue-collar white males in particular have done very badly from the from the globalization of the last 20, 30 years. Not so much in terms of jobs, although hundreds of thousands, millions have been lost, but in terms of incomes. Their incomes are declining, and with some reason, they believe that the incomes of their children are going to be lower than theirs. They believe their children are going to be worse off than they are. And that cuts against the very idea of the American dream, that you're always on an escalator going up. So I think that's a key part of it. Will Hillary be good for the American economy and good for globalization? Look, there's really no simple way of addressing the crisis of middle-skilled people in the developed world, and even in the developing world. Even in China, manufacturing jobs are shrinking. The roboticization, the impact of technology on the labor markets is a global phenomenon. So the idea that Hillary can have a simple fix for this is, I think, a bit far-fetched, but she will certainly spend more on middle-class training and on infrastructure if Congress permits her to. If Congress permits her, and that's key.
Can I for a moment, and this is linked to the idea of what Irfan suggested, there are multiple Americas, what Ed suggested, jobs are the key. Are we seeing, in a way, a much more divided America, Jennifer, than ever before? Between the educated and the uneducated, between those who have access to jobs and opportunities and those who do not have, immigrants versus the others. Are those divides, those fault lines actually coming to the fore in this US presidential elections? More than ever before, perhaps?
We do see quite a bit of evidence of polarization in America, more than we have in the past. For a couple decades now, we've seen severe gridlock and polarization in U.S. politics in the Congress. And that has now really started to bleed out into the electorate quite a bit, such that if you're surely on one right or left side, it's very difficult to present anybody with some information or insight that would cause them to change their mind. However, there are still a number of issues on which many Americans agree. Even hot topic issues like abortion. Most Americans, it turns out, have relatively reasonable common views on these hot topic issues, and so sometimes the extent to which there are deep divides within the electorate get overstated in the media.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're saying they're overstated in the media, because, Professor Cohen, in a sense in India, there, people are suggesting that this election also poses some kind of a threat to American democracy in the way we knew it. You've got a candidate, Donald Trump, hinting for the first time that he and his supporters won't even accept the verdict. They are calling it a rigged election. Do you believe there is a threat, or are we exaggerating this threat?
I think that's a threat because after the election, when Trump goes down in defeat probably, there's going to be a struggle for the Republican Party, and the nature of that debate will determine how American politics is going to evolve. I think that the future of the Republican Party is at stake now.
In a sense, much like the Congress Party in India. The Congress Party in India finds its future at stake. You're saying the Republican Party in America finds its future at stake. The US presidential elections in a few days from now. What does this election mean from India? Who's better, Professor Cohen, for India? Is Hillary Clinton better, or do you believe Donald Trump is better?
I don't think either is better. They're both the same. They both refuse to comment on it.
Are you saying it'll make no difference at all?
Yeah, there may be a difference, but it's hard to tell from this point.
You know, that's interesting. You're suggesting that. Irfan Nuruddin, who do you think is better for India, given the fact that Democrats in the past have been tough on India when it comes to human rights, when it comes to Kashmir, when it comes to the nuclear issue? Or is Donald Trump simply far too unpredictable, not someone that Narendra Modi would like to deal with? He had a good relationship with Barack Obama. It might not work with someone like a Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think from a perspective of just maintaining and building on the investments in the US-India relationship that have been made, having a Clinton presidency has a lot more continuity. You'd expect a lot of people who have risen in the State Department, who have risen in commerce, in the Department of Defense, who have built now a network with Indian counterparts to remain. And so that would be presumably a good thing for India. But there is, of course, this other dimension, which is that both of these candidates have made anti-globalization statements in their campaigns. Hillary has come out quite ambivalent, if not anti, the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiated, really a legacy issue for President Obama. For India, which relies on globalization, which relies on access to global markets, including to the United States, this is an issue. It is also completely unclear whether Hillary would do any more to release restrictions on H-1B visas, right? The kinds of issues that Indian businesses have really been felt targeted about. I don't see any evidence, as Professor Cohen suggests, that Clinton would necessarily be better for that than Mr. Trump.
You know, I also asked this, Ed Luce, because only a few days ago we had a unique Republican Hindus for Donald Trump convention in New Jersey, where there were posters of Narendra Modi, cheek by jowl in a sense, with Donald Trump, and the undercurrent was Islamophobia. Do you believe Islamophobia will drive many Hindus, Indian Americans to Donald Trump, or is that again an exaggeration?
Well, I think for those Indian Americans who are supporting Donald Trump, that's the motivation, definitely. But if you look at the numbers, the breakdown, Indian Americans in general are overwhelmingly in favor of Hillary Clinton. So, you know, I think there are wheels within wheels there. Let me just say one thing about whether which would be better for India in terms of the US-India Natural Alliance or Special Relationship, whatever you choose to call it, since 9/11, has survived Republican and Democratic administrations, Congress-led coalitions, BJP-led coalitions, and now BJP-only government. It's pretty well baked into the system. I don't think Hillary is going to do anything other than try and deepen that even further. Trump is a complete wild card. He's talked about removing the nuclear umbrella from East Asia. He's talked about Korea and Japan getting their own independent nuclear arsenal. It cannot be good from any Indian perspective to have such unpredictability at a very, very delicate and dynamic point in the Asia-Pacific story.
Is that one of the dangers of a Trump presidency, Jennifer Victor, that at a time when the world needs someone who is seen to be stable, you know, it needs someone to provide a stable hand, you've got an unpredictable wild card in Donald Trump. Is that one of the weaknesses, and that is why countries like India should be wary, in a way, of a potential Trump presidency? We don't know what he will do next.
I think that's right. Trump is, as we've called him, a bit of a wild card. And for most respects, he's not even really a Republican in a sense. He has the nomination of the Republican Party, but if you look among the leaders of the party, the elites, the current elected officials, they're not behind him. None of the recent former Republican presidents. He became the nominee in a way by accident because being a showman, being a media genius, he was able to take advantage of his fame and take advantage of the lack of coordination that was among those other 16 Republican presidential hopefuls.
Does it worry you ever, Professor Cohen, as the doyen of strategic studies, that you might have a United States president who doesn't even know where the global map, doesn't know where Aleppo is? I mean, does it stage where foreign policy doesn't even matter to this U.S. president?
It worries me, but I think the system will compensate for it. If he does become president, there'll be a vice president who will know more about foreign policy than he does. And secondly, I think Trump brings in a few new ideas in foreign policy. One of them is the relationship with the allies and the alliances. He's going to recast that structure, I think. And India may fall into that category. He also pointed out early on that an alliance of Muslim moderate states would be important, which would involve Pakistan.
You know, interesting, Muslim moderate states that would include Pakistan. But Professor Nuruddin, you know, Narendra Modi seemed to have a special chemistry in a sense with Barack Obama. Obama became the first US president to come for India's Republic Day parade. Do you see Narendra Modi, given the kind of strong individual he is, having the same kind of relationship with either a Trump or Hillary, who also are strong individuals, but very different in a sense from Barack Obama in the way their personal chemistry operates, or their personal style of dealing with world leaders?
I think it would be a challenge. I mean, it's clear that Mr. Obama and Mr. Modi made a very conscious decision to invest in the personal relationship between the two of them, taking very explicit, high-profile steps to acknowledge that. Mr. Obama taking Mr. Modi in D.C. to the Martin Luther King Memorial, the invitation to the Republic Day, the decision on the U.S. side to postpone the State of the Union so that Mr. Obama could come for Republic Day. Whether or not Mrs. Clinton or Mr. Trump would do the same, I think is unclear. I don't think they're going to invest the same way, though, as Professor Cohen said, this is now baked in. I mean, there's a lot of institutional building that has been done. This is no longer just about the personalities at the very top. That said, with Secretary Clinton, there's a history where India is concerned. It was under her watch as Secretary of State that Mr. Modi did not have a visa to come to the United States. I do think that there would be a lot more questions as American patience with India's religious intolerance issues rises. That I think, on the one hand, it's a deep, endearing relationship, but to expect it to be all hunky-dory, I think, is unrealistic. There are going to be some hard questions asked.
I want to bring in Jim Malone. Jim, I started off this program by asking you who's going to win.
Yep.
Should I put that again to you? Are you a betting man? If you're a betting man, do you believe that I could safely say that, barring a miracle, Hillary Clinton will be the next president of the United States and the first woman president at that?
If the polls hold and Clinton is the next president, she's going to have two major challenges, one at home to try to heal up the political wounds. The other one is abroad. What's America's place in the world?
Right.
And will there be changes after Barack Obama?
I'm going to ask you there, 30 seconds. As a woman, the first woman president of the United States, if Hillary Clinton becomes that, does that mean, you know, does that represent a qualitative change? Or do you believe this is part of dynasty? Husband became president, she becomes president. In India, we argue against dynastical politics. How's the US different? Or is this a tectonic watershed moment?
I think it's really a fundamental, profound experience to have the first female elected president in the United States, and I worry a little bit that the conditions under which it's happening with her very unusual opponent diminish that accomplishment, but there's no question that she is qualified to be president and is likely to be a fantastic president.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Professor Cohen, you've been tracking India for several years. Remember, way back in the 1960s, we had Indira Gandhi. It's taken almost 50 years after that for the US to come close to having a woman president.
I'd say it's about time.
It's about time. Maybe Hillary's time has come. That's the general sense we are getting here in Washington. This could be the year of Hillary Clinton, perhaps because Donald Trump himself has pressed the self-destruct button. To all my guests, thank you very much for joining us. We will continue our special coverage on the US presidential elections on India Today TV. Thanks for watching this special show from Washington, D.C.